Hello, Isopod fans. This is Wally Kern with Supreme Gecko Supreme Isopods, and here we are at Isopod Setup Review number 20. This Isopod setup is for Karl, and it's Porcellio haasi. This is going to be a fun one. Join me. So as you know, for a very limited time, I'm doing these Isopod setup reviews. I'm taking a look at people's setups and giving some suggestions, some ideas on how they can improve their setups, whether they're having issues with their isopods or their isopods aren't breeding and giving them babies. I'm providing some information to hopefully help them pass that point. And you can submit your isopod setup for review by doing the following. Send me a video of about a minute or so and include these points. In the video, tell me what isopod you're working with, how long you've kept these isopods, whether you just got them in or you've had them for some time, whether you have issues or concerns about the isopods. Tell me if you're getting babies from these isopods. Let me know the enclosure size. Let me know what type of ventilation you're using for the top and for the sides. Tell me about the substrate. Tell me what's in the substrate and let me know the depth of that substrate. Show me the wet side of the enclosure. Let me know what kind of materials you're using to maintain that moistness in that enclosure. Tell me how often you feed and what you're feeding. Tell me how you put water into this enclosure. And finally, tell me if you're using calcium and what type of calcium you're using. Keep it all under 1 minute or so. Send me the video and I'll take a look at it and we'll include it in the Isopod setup review. So let's go ahead and take a look at today's video. Again, this is from Karl and this is Porcellio haasi or haasi.
Hi Wally, this is my Porcellio haasi high yellow setup. I was at the reptile store yesterday and found these guys for very cheap, so I decided to make a setup for them.
Who in the world finds Porcellio haasi at a pet store and for cheap? That's incredible. Send me some of those. Let's get back into the video.
I'm a brand new beginner hobbyist. This is the second setup I have ever made, and I made it yesterday. This is a temporary setup until I start seeing the first little babies, and then I will move them into something larger because this is a very large species.
This is a very large species. Now, a very important point here is that Karl said that this is a temporary setup. This isn't something that he's going to keep these animals in for a long time. And what I'd like you to do is if you see little points where Karl or any of our keepers can improve their setup, make sure you put a comment down below. Let's keep going.
Yeah, let's get into it. I have just a single corner as the wet zone because they like it a little bit drier. I got some eggshells over there. All of the bark, wood, and leaf litter that I'm using here is from cottonwood trees, which is a hardwood.
Going to stop it there. So we have a moist side. We have some calcium, which he provides in eggshells. We have some decaying wood. We have some leaves, and we'll come back to that part in just a second. Let's keep going.
My substrate is made up of that squishy, rotting wood that you can grab out of the middle of a dead tree in the forest.
I have to stop there. That is fantastic. So if you've ever gone into the forest, you've turned over logs, and you find some of the trees with the wood with that it flakes off, some of the white wood and especially hardwood, and it flakes off, and you can collect some of that wood and bring it back and use it in your isopod enclosures after you clean it, after you sterilize it. That is absolutely perfect for these isopod setups. Now, I'm hearing something here that's a little bit of a concern, but we'll get back to that in just a second.
Some leaf litter, activated charcoal, cocoa fiber to air it out, eggshells, a lot of worm casings, and some springtails. I got quite a bit of substrate here. I think that's better for a smaller enclosure. I have not fed them yet, but I plan on feeding them some dried minnows or fish flakes, or they need a lot of protein, so high protein snacks. Yeah, these guys are pretty much active at night, I have found out, so this is the only guy that I can see. There aren't any under these pieces of bark yet, so yeah. Let me know what you think. Thanks.
We lost our lights behind us. I had to turn them back on. Great setup, Karl. Very good. You don't tell us how many isopods you started with. I'm going to assume that it's at least 6. Most cultures that you get are usually between 6 and 10. The size of the enclosure has me a little bit concerned. I'd like to start with my cultures, especially with larger isopods, especially the Porcellio giant Spanish isopods. I'd like to start with something at least 6 quarts. Here's an important key point with small enclosures. Any small enclosure seems like it would be easier to maintain, but it is far more difficult to maintain. Any changes in temperature, any changes in humidity or in moisture, any changes whatsoever, small changes impacts the enclosure so much. As an example, if you keep fish in a 10-gallon and you keep fish in a 55, a small change to a 55 is balanced in the whole aquarium. A small change to a 10-gallon enclosure for your fish really impacts them far more than a bigger tank. Same thing with these enclosures for isopods. I was a bit concerned with the substrate, but you did mention that you have worm castings in there. So a lot of different things going in there. Charcoal, great. The worm castings, very good. And you have that decaying wood, which is very, very, very important. I'm going to jump back to the enclosure itself here. Let's go ahead and see if I can find a good picture here. Perfect. At this point, I see that you're using leaves, which is really, really good. But what I would do for these leaves, because it's such a small enclosure, is I would crumble those leaves up a little bit. That damp side is a very, very small area, and that's perfect for Porcellio haasi. But I tell you what, that's a very small area, and it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain that in such a small enclosure. Checking out the ventilation, it looks like there's some holes on the side. Again, I think that you need some more ventilation for these animals. Porcellio haasi really need a lot of ventilation. And as you provide more ventilation, it's going to be harder to maintain that moist area. You mentioned that you'll be feeding a lot of proteins to these animals, and that's right on, spot on with that. So on my scale of green is go and good, yellow is something needs to be changed because you're going to start losing animals or you're not going to have as many babies, and red is you better change something really quick or else you're going to lose your whole colony. I would put this right in between a yellow and a green. You're probably going to maintain this colony time. It's just going to be very difficult to maintain that humidity and that moisture level. The ventilation, I think, could be improved. My huge suggestion here is to put them into a 6-quart minimum enclosure. And I know that you said that this is temporary, but I would put them in a 6-quart enclosure as soon as you can. Add ventilation on the tops of that enclosure and on the sides of that enclosure. Other than that, I think that you're right on. Isopod fans, how did he do? Leave a comment down below if I missed anything. And again, if you want to submit your isopod setup for my review, send me that video. Include the instructions that I include in the description down below in your video, and we'll take a look at it. Karl, I hope you learned something here. I hope everybody that watched this enjoyed it and certainly learned something. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.